International Fight Week is upon us. A card that was not quite once what it was has been put together and is a decent card on paper. You know, short notice fights may kind of have it labeled somewhat watered down, but you know, I mean, we will not judge it based off, you know, assumptions at that stage. We can judge it properly, and that's what we will do next week on the balance breakdown. Alex Bahia, Yuri Prochazka is your main event. Brian Ortega, Diego Lopez in your co-main event. Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze stepping up to 205 pounds. Mero Bueno Silva, Macy Chasson, and obviously Machado Gary versus Michael Venom Page opening up the main card. We're going to fly through this card and these fights over the next 40-45 minutes or so. Harry, good sir, how are you? I asked you the question off air. I'll ask you again on air. Does this feel to you like an International Fight Week card? You know, obviously we had the Conor McGregor and Chandler fight that, you know, would have probably put the big fight feels on this. And I think the UFC have done a phenomenal job to put the card together for what it is. I'm not caught in onto the hype as of yet. You know, we're recording this on earlier on in the week. Obviously, it'll be out on Thursday. Card is subject to change. It has changed a lot already. But how are you feeling about this coming in?
A bit like that, right? Like, I'll just go off on a bit of a spiel, but I'll try and keep it as tight as possible. Like, I, like the entire MMA world, are so saddened that Conor McGregor again will not be making that walk. Not just because, you know, I'm not expecting to see prime Conor McGregor. I'm not expecting to see Eddie Alvarez Conor McGregor. I'm not expecting to see the killer that we once were accustomed to. But this is a man that still has something to offer MMA in the actual octagon itself, not just the fact that he's a megastar, not just the fact that he's got this brand and that brand and the next brand and he can talk like this and whatever. He obviously still has something to offer from an athletic perspective. And for him to be forced out with injury, you know, Conor was forced out once, I think, in a Cage Warriors bout prior to this. And other than that, if he signs on the contract line, he's showing up and he's ready to fight. Whether he's injured or not injured, we know, we've seen all the documentaries of the Chad Mendes. We know, and it's been well documented, of fights with Diego Randao and otherwise where he's come in injured. And it's just such a shame that this specific injury has forced him to take the action he's taken. And let's be honest, it's the right thing, right? You absolutely shouldn't be stepping into an octagon with Michael Chandler if you are hurt. That's not smart at all. And so props to Conor for doing what's right for him, his family, his team. But for us, I was very excited to see Conor McGregor back in. I was very excited to see the fight with Michael Chandler. I thought it was a great fight on paper. And actually, I won't give too much props for the UFC in making the bout they made. I'm giving props to the fighters, right? For Yuri to turn around and to take this fight on short notice, for Alex Poatan to turn around and take this fight on short notice. Massive, massive, massive props to those fighters. They have saved International Fight Week's card. Fair play to them. The fight itself, super buzzing for the fight itself. I think it's a great fight. Good rematch. It was a decent fight before. It'll be a better fight this time. But you're right. It doesn't feel like the marquee International Fight Week that we've become accustomed to. I will just add one final point. And I think that's also because we had UFC 300 this year, and it was such a monster, brilliant, crazy good card that it does feel like most other cards are going to pale in comparison.
Yeah, the similarities that we have with this card and the 300 card is we have Alex Bahia at the top of him. He's come in to save the day again. And this guy's story, and before I go into that, you're 100% right about Conor McGregor owes nothing to nobody. Rightfully stepped out of this fight. You know, it's important for him. He said it's important for him, for his fans and everybody else, that he goes into these fights now at 100% after sacrificing so much. And I mean, if you're arguing about that, I think you want to go back go back to school, or go back to and have some lunch, or go outside and calm down. Like, I mean, I don't want to listen to it. It's nonsense. It's like, you know, MMA is so gone, like, so what have you done for me lately? And it's a lot of these opinions are coming from fans that don't even remember Conor on his rise. Anyway, I think that's the reality of the situation. But what fans do remember is Alex Bahia, and they remember the fact that he did come in at UFC 300 and save the day. They're going to remember that he's coming in here at 303 to save the day. And this guy's story, and I've been fucking saying it, this guy's story is sensational, and we tried to shine a light onto it as much as we can on this platform, and we're shining a light on it again. I mean, fresh off that win, fresh off broken foot or broken toe, you know, which is recovered, he's back again on short notice to take on Yuri Prochazka, a guy who as well is sacrificing his preparation for another crack at the title that he once held as well. You know, maximum credit to two of these guys in the main event. Looking back at the first fight, are you expecting to see somewhat of a similar fight this time around between the two of these guys? I mean, we had the immediate calf kicks that played an effect on Yuri Prochazka, somewhat forced him to close the distance, try and back Alex Bahia up against the cage, obviously, and smartly looking for a takedown against the Brazilian as well. It was the elbows, the hellbows, if you want to call them that stopped the fight the last time out. You know, murmurs of an early stoppage, but I think, you know, looking back, it was fair. I think this fight is going to live up to the expectations. Look, at these guys are not getting a full camp, but they're definitely going to deliver, because Alex Bahia always delivers when he steps foot inside the octagon. Yuri Prochazka always delivers when he steps foot into the octagon. So you got a beautiful little conundrum there in the main event, Harry, and I'm curious to hear about your thoughts for the rematch.
I can't wait, is the honest answer. I think rematches, especially for titles, especially at the elite level, are always really, really interesting. You know, two of my favorite fights of all time are Alexander Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev. I don't think I need to bring that up ever again. I think that's effectively tattooed across my forehead, right? The amount of times I've referenced those fights. But it's going to be really interesting to see specifically what Yuri does to change the outcome here. I would like to think he's going to wrestle a little bit earlier.
Let's be real, he should be wrestling for his life here. It's as simple as that. That is what you got to do against Alex Bahia. And I don't think there's any better opportunity to do it rather than this fight here, when he's not going to be close to 100% of his capabilities inside here. You know, maybe Yuri might not be either, but, you know, that resting, that grinding, you know, that's going to drain on both of these guys' gas tanks. But you got to be doing that. Like, I mean, there is no other way, Harry, I don't think, for Yuri Prochazka to go in there and try to close the distance from the get-go and try and get this fight down, try to get Alex Bahia on his back.
So look, I think that Yuri in the pocket exchanges against the fence obviously landed, right? And he got his shots off. I think the difference in this one is that in the first fight, the read that I had was Alex's adherence to fundamentals will 99 times out of 100 beat the mad bastardry that Yuri has. We have seen this ad nauseum. Johnny Walker, Michel Pereira at times, when there is an extreme scale tip toward mad bastardry, and then you come up against somebody who just is really, really, really good fundamentally, there is often an ability to counteract some of that mad bastardry, because the cues that you have aren't there, right? Footwork placement, head placement, hand placement, these are things just aren't there. And Alex Poatan, we have seen, is obviously very, 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 very elite at those fundamental movements. And so I'm interested to see what Yuri tries to do to change that up. Is he going to go all the other way, and he's just going to put all of his chips in and say, fuck it, we're just going to war, boys, and I'm just going to run across the fence and I'm just going to try and get hold of him, I'm going to try and drag him to the ground, I'm going to try and beat him up, etc., etc.? Or are we going to see that he's going to try to negate the calf kick? Because we know that it's coming, right? We know that calf kick is a massive staple of the Bahia game. Can he do that? Can he start to maneuver himself around in such a fundamental way? I think the answer is no. And
I was going to that was exactly what I was going to ask you. I was like, how can you do it? Because Alex Bahia has mastered that technique so well. It's like he doesn't load up for it. It's like he just flows into that calf kick, and it doesn't need to land with great force for it to have great effect either. It's just such a great tool that Alex Pereira has. And we saw that in the very first fight. The very first one almost took, if I do remember correctly, could have even took Yuri Prochazka off of his feet in that one. And that's exactly what Alex Pereira is going to be looking to do this time out again. And, you know, can you think of a way out? Like, I mean, the only way is to stay out, even if you're all the way out, or you're going all the way in. Now, when you're trying to close the distance too, not easy to do against a guy like Alex Pereira with a lethal lead left hook. But this is very curious. It's like the blueprint has been there to beat a guy like Alex Pereira, yet no one has been able to do it, which has made his rise up through the UFC and the fact that he has become a double champion even more impressive, in my opinion, because in reality, and when you get into the real cruxes of mixed martial arts and how it works, it's not supposed to be this way. And it's very fascinating to see Alex Pereira be able to come in and do this time and time again.
Agreed. Just to answer the first question, like where we will find out is immediately after the Pereira fight. Obviously, Yuri needs to take a little bit of time off. He needs to rest. He needs to recuperate. He needs to make sure that he's healthy to train and all these sorts of things. But that doesn't necessarily stop the skill development elements, right? He could be in the gym, reviewing tape, reviewing the fight, and game planning with his coaches to say, okay, well, we're going to fight him again, right? Because we need a couple of wins, and then we're right back in that fight with him. What do we do differently? Right? What do we do differently? And if they have in the lab deciphered a way or a mechanic or a system that they think will work to detract away from the left hand and detract away from the low calf kick, and then allow Yuri to get to the grappling, then we might have something interesting in that first round. But what we do also see from Pereira is an ability to make adjustments. And so this is why a lot of the reason why I'm fascinated by this fight specifically is because I really can't wait to see Pereira pushed and tested in the facets of MMA, in all of the facets of MMA. I really want to see, and it's absolutely insane to say this really, but I really want to see him actually face a little bit of proper adversity and to actually have to come back from it, because the Israel Adesanya knockout, it is what it is. You get clipped with an elite level striker like Israel, it happens. But the grappling exchanges between the two of them were relatively same, right? Nobody really dominated the other. Yuri wasn't able to take Alex down for significant periods of portions of time. And then he got fucking sent to the Shadow Realm with some elbows. Like, I'm really interested. What happens when somebody mounts Pereira for 3 minutes? What happens when somebody takes his back for 2.5 minutes? What happens when he can't get up from half guard? What happens when he can't pummel butterfly hooks? What happens when he can't stuff a single leg? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm so interested as to whether we can ever face those answers, or find out the answers to those questions from somebody like Alex Pereira. Maybe we find out against Yuri. I don't think so, but maybe we do.
Yeah, I think there's a strong possibility of it in this fight, to tell you the truth, given that, you know, by no means is Alex Pereira coming off the couch, nor is Prochazka, that being said. But yeah, I mean, in terms of limitations, and, you know, Pereira was over in Australia, still was training away, but, you know, there's difference between striking rounds and grappling rounds, and building up your kind of cardio through that as well. Like, I mean, Alex Pereira is probably a guy that could go in there and strike for 5 rounds at his pace, but it's up to, like I said, up to Yuri Prochazka to go in there, close the distance, make this a really grinding, grueling fight, and test the gas tank of Pereira. What happens when someone takes his back? What happens when someone mounts him? I imagine that he gets extremely, extremely, extremely tired in those positions, trying to defend and trying not to get finished. And then you have to ask yourself, the question is, how much does that take away from his striking? How much does that take away from his power? And that's where things start to get a little bit interesting. I'm very excited to see that as well in the main event. Any final thoughts before we move on, Harry?
I just want to echo the statements that you made at the very start, which is just MMA at its best has beautiful, wonderful, rich stories. And this fight is exactly one of those stories.
Indeed. Look, we spoke a lot about mad bastardry for the main event. We have it in abundance in the co-main event too. Brian Ortega, Diego Lopez, who is so far being one of the fighters of the year, if I do say so myself, in his rise up the division, if he can get the job done against Brian Ortega. Obviously, both these guys taking this fight on short notice as well. Brian Ortega spoke about possibly taking a fight at 155, got the call for this. Obviously got paid the bag as well, and credit to him for getting that, same as Diego Lopez. This is a fascinating fight on paper though, Harry. I mean, I like Diego Lopez. I love his style. I love his energy. I love his ferocity. Styles makes fights, in my opinion. And I think this is going to be could be a difficult one, depending on what condition Brian Ortega is coming into this fight. I would love to see him this fight now with two of these guys on a full camp. Because of that, I'm not so sure how it's going to go. I would kind of say, if it was to pick between the both of these guys, who's a guy that's going to be keeping himself in shape on a regular, I think it's going to be Diego Lopez. I don't think it's going to be Brian Ortega, who does enjoy a little bit of downtime in between fights. We saw Diego Lopez in the Ultimate Fighter house. He was in the Alexa Grasso's team in the corner. I can imagine he's been keeping himself in check there. What has Brian Ortega been doing? I don't know. How much is the weight cut going to take from him? I don't know. So, look, on paper and skills versus skills, you know, I probably would lean towards Brian Ortega, but when you put in those intangibles, you know, you got to be kind of somewhat leaning towards Diego Lopez, grinding him out here maybe to get the win. I'm curious to hear what you think.
I think Diego Lopez is a better fighter than Brian Ortega. Full stop. I disagree completely that, like, styles make fights, right? I agree with you. I think Diego Lopez is a fucking nightmare for Brian Ortega. An absolute nightmare. Brian Ortega gets hit. Diego Lopez hits like a fucking Mack truck. Diego Lopez is quick. Brian Ortega is not quick. Brian Ortega does not move his head very well. We saw one fight against Chang Sung Jung where Brian Ortega looked like he'd been to a boxing class. Other than that, you got Max Holloway fucking holding Ortega's hands up, showing him how he can defend himself and these sorts of things. Obviously, Brian Ortega, really, 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 really good grappler. But I have a feeling that what happens here is when this hits the deck, it turns into a jiu-jitsu roll. Right. And both of them kind of forget that they're doing MMA, because they're not going to be, they're not competing against wrestlers. They're competing against grapplers, right? They're competing against guys that are jiu-jitsu guys out and out. And we're going to see some very, 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 very fun exchanges. And obviously Brian Ortega is an elite level black belt, but I just think that on the feet, Diego Lopez hits way harder. I think he's way cleaner on the feet. He's got a good chin. Brian Ortega obviously has a good chin too, but I certainly
don't see Diego Lopez coming in here and initiating any grappling exchanges. I'd be very surprised. I think it'd be somewhat foolish. I can foresee Brian Ortega closing the distance and pulling guard and doing everything that he can to get this fight to the ground, because I do agree with you. I think Ortega's striking when he's on song it can be a little bit, but it can be a little bit dangerous, but we haven't really seen him. Yeah, he hasn't really been on song.
One fight in 10 UFC fights, we've seen him be like, oh shit, like this guy's fucking, he's got it dialed in. This camp's been amazing. One fight. It's not enough. It's not enough. Diego Lopez, every time he has come out, he obviously super impressed us against Movsar Evloev, and he has super impressed us in every fight since then. Now, don't get me wrong. Has he been in there with the level of competition of Brian Ortega? No. I understand. But you know what you're looking at when you watch a fighter. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't go out and lose on Saturday to Brian Ortega. That is a very, 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 very possible outcome. I do, however, think in an all-round MMA skill set, he's a better fighter than Brian Ortega is.
Do you think he has enough to get Brian Ortega out of there? Max Holloway, the only guy to stop Brian Ortega legitimately, I guess. Look at Yair Rodriguez was a shoulder injury. You do think that he has the ability to go out there, and that would be a big, big statement there, and would put Lopez right in the mix there for title contention as well. I mean, he's up at elite level status if he goes out there and finishes Brian Ortega. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the reason why I say that is Max, as we know, doesn't have like one hitter quitter power, and the fucking people that didn't watch the fight against Justin Gaethje will be like, oh yeah, but he absolutely decimated Justin Gaethje for 5 rounds. 5 rounds or 4 rounds and like 4 minutes and 50 seconds or whatever. And then it was the accumulation, and that last shot obviously just destroyed Justin Gaethje. But yeah, I think that Diego Lopez hits very, 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 very hard. And for somebody like Brian Ortega, who we know has a great chin, but not an amazing chin, that's a recipe for disaster. We know that somebody like Brian Ortega can get hit and does get hit. And often when he gets hit, he stays hit. And then we start to see the desperation takedowns, and we see the desperation clinches and these sorts of things.
Lopez doesn't have to go in and like knock him out clean. He can kind of wear him down and shoot for a TKO and kind of give, like, you know, I think, you know, there is a route to where I can see Diego Lopez breaking a guy like Brian Ortega with his level of ferocity and his forward pressure and stuff like that as well. But, you know, Brian Ortega is a knack for surprising us as well. But I think, given the circumstances of this fight, especially after talking about with you, I'm definitely leaning more so on the side of Diego Lopez winning this one. Any final thoughts?
I mean, I think if I was to put money on it, which I never do and never will, and don't take my advice, is I think Brian Ortega probably has enough to not get finished. He's so gritty and so tough and so durable. But I can also see Diego Lopez hurting him on the feet. There is a ground exchange of some form. Diego Lopez does enough to keep himself safe and then ground and pounds him out. I can absolutely see that as an outcome too.
Absolutely. Moving on down to the 205-pound division, Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze, who stepped in at short notice. Anthony Smith, who stepped in at short notice. This fight, and it's has been changed up about 672 times since it's been originally announced. Obviously, it was supposed to be Carlos Ulberg versus Jamahal Hill. We are left with Anthony Smith coming in at short notice, Roman Dolidze coming in at even shorter notice. What do you think of this one?
It's a fight I didn't know I needed to see, but I do kind of like it, right? Like, I'm interested to see what size is going to do in this. Like, Anthony Smith is not a small human, and Roman Dolidze certainly is not a small middleweight. I think Anthony Smith is a smart enough fighter here that what we know is that if we're going on the ground with Dolidze, we have to keep our hips away so that he's not looking for knee bars and leg locks. Ask Phil Hawes. And we're also making sure that we are not ending up in his close guard for significant periods of time, because those hellacious elbows from the top are absolutely savage. And so I think Anthony Smith has enough nous for that. On the feet, Roman Dolidze hits far harder than Anthony Smith in terms of the snappy, impactful shots. But Anthony Smith is one of those guys that has like thudding power rather than like snapback, crazy, smash, smash, smash power. And so I'm very interested to see how it goes in both the kickboxing realm, but also when it hits the mat, because it's going to hit the mat. This is a Roman Dolidze Anthony Smith fight. It's going to hit the mat at some point, I suspect. If it doesn't, I'm favoring Anthony Smith. I think if it does, it means that Dolidze has likely developed and enveloped Anthony Smith into his game plan and will probably be more successful there.
Indeed, yeah, I think that was an excellent breakdown, and there's not too much that I could add to that. I'm looking forward to the fight as well. Credit to Dolidze, obviously coming up in weight class as well. Won't have to worry too much about a weight cut. Anthony Smith, quick turnaround for him. I mean, another win. You know, I mean, you know, every time I see Anthony Smith coming in there and competing, I always get thrown back to the Glover Teixeira fight and how much of a beatdown he took in that, and, you know, calling for him to probably hang it up, and, you know, maybe he should have, but, you know, we have to give credit where credit is due. He's stuck in there. He's still in there picking up wins as well, taking fights at short notice. I mean, a warrior at heart, and always has been a warrior, so credit to him. 135-pound division, Harry Marubino Silva versus Macy Chiasson. I mean, the fight, if I'm being honest, doesn't really tickle the fancy. Really strange placement of this fight on the card, to be honest. Marubino Silva, obviously, you know, has had her disappointments in recent fights. Obviously dropped the title to Raquel Pennington. Will be looking to kind of come and revigorate herself in the division. Macy Chiasson has been on a good run there too. You know, it could turn into a striking fight. And if it does, I think I fancy Mara Bueno Silva with her speed and her power to get the job done here. Maybe even look for a knockout.
Yeah, I think Mara Bueno Silva is the more well-rounded fighter. Chasson is long for the division, and so if she can keep her at the end of the jab, then maybe she can get some stuff going there. But Chasson is really good from top. Very, very, very good when she gets fights down, and she's grindy and gritty, and she's good from those sort of controlling, dominant pin positions. I think Mara Bueno Silva is a tough person to try and hold there for long periods of time. And so that certainly might be a problem for Macy Chasson. But it certainly feels as though the UFC wins with this one too, where if Macy Chasson goes out and gets a win, then she's been on a good run, and that's somebody for Raquel Pennington, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Equally, Mara Bueno Silva with a win here against, let's be honest, lesser competition than she is used to fighting, immediately vaults herself back up. Maybe not into an immediate rematch, but into something,
100%. Which brings us to the main card opener. Ian Machado Gary versus Michael Page. A fucking belter of a fight. Cannot wait to see this go down. I shared a few opinions on the Owl Triangle about this fight. I feel a big key in this fight for Ian Gary is to try and cut down the tree. I think he's got to attack the calves of Michael Venom Page, and that's going to open up a hell of a lot more for him. I'm not going to butcher the analysis of this. I'm going to send it straight over to you. I think, this is going to be a super technical fight. It's going to have to be Ian Gary that takes the bull by the horns and go on the attack here. He's going to have to do that cautiously. I think he'll use his jab, but I think he'll use his jab to set up his calf kick, which will then slowly see him, maybe open up the body, open up the head of Michael Venom Page if he is struggling with, that his calves hurting or having to switch stances, doesn't have that same level of explosiveness, springy action in his punches. I think it's a blueprint that Diego Lima kind of set out to defeat Michael Venom Page, and I think it's a blueprint that Ian Gary is going to use here. He's even specifically said, in the build up to this fight, he was like, if you look at Michael Venom Page versus Diego Lima, he only threw 2 shots in the first 2.5 minutes. So that means he's been studying that fight like a motherfucker. And I think he's going to come in here with a calf kick heavy game plan, similar enough to what we've seen with Neil Magny. We saw how effective that was. And there might be a little bit of added extra pressure on Ian Gary to go out there and get the finish. I'm very, very curious to hear what your thoughts are on this fight, Harry.
I think the fight you should be studying is Logan Storley.
Yeah, very true.
That's the way he wins this fight. As easy as possible. The way he wins easy as possible is the Logan Storley fight. Like, do I think Ian Gary is a better grappler than Michael Venom Page? Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I think the room that Ian Gary is training in when he's in America at Killcliff has some obviously fantastic grapplers in it. We know that he's gone and done some work with the Bronx. We know, if we look at his social media, that he has gone and spent at least 4 weeks with one of the best MMA grapplers of all time, Damian Maia. One of the fellas that trains at the gym was out there when Ian was out there. He is a high-level black belt, just a straight grappler, and was watching Ian and said, Ian looks a very, very technical, very, very strong grappler. And so obviously, I'm not giving away game plans here because I don't know them, but you wouldn't go out to Brazil knowing you're going to fight MVP with a guy that is a back attack specialist if there's not a level of grappling.
Can I play devil's advocate on that point? He was out there for the duration of his last camp against Jeff Neal as well, and could have went out there and implemented a similar game plan and chose not to. And I think everything that you said is 100% valid. Listening to Ian Gary talk and maybe knowing him as a fighter, a guy that does have like a little bit of a ego and wants to prove that he's the best at any particular kind of stage of his career in kind of going in there and beating guys at their own game, he's going to go out there and strike with MVP. I think he definitely should be looking to mix this, and I'll be very, very glad if he does, because I think it will be a very cementing victory if he goes out there and fights this as a mixed martial arts fight and looks to take the fight down. I think he always has that in his back pocket if the striking battle isn't going his way. but I think he's going to go out there and try and outstrike a guy like MVP. Now, that's playing with fire a little bit. I'm very strongly opinionated when it comes to that, to tell you the truth. You know, I think he's at least going to mix it up for half of the fight and striking, if not all the fight. I think he's going to try and outstrike him over 3 rounds.
It's highly probable that that's the answer, right? The only thing I will say is that Ian has been talking about wanting to get a submission in the UFC and wanting to prove that he's not just a striker and whatever. If there is a fight that is easier for him to do that in the UFC, show me one. That's not to say that MVP isn't good on the ground. Like I know people that have rolled with him and he's good on the ground, right? He knows what he's doing. He's not a scrub, but this is different caliber, right? This is obviously MMA grappling, and this is somebody that's taken their specific grappling very, very seriously in Ian Garry. I guess not a suspicion, but what I would hope happens here for Ian Garry is that he does a little bit of the Khabib Nurmagomedov, where you opt for the wrestling first, you opt for the grappling first, and then sure, you can strike with him. It absolutely won't happen because, as you say, the ego and the fighter, and he wants to beat the guy at his own game, and all of this stuff is far, far, far more prevalent. But if he wants to get a finish here, he can certainly get a finish standing. But MVP is an extremely difficult guy to get to and then put away. That'd be an absolutely huge feat for Ian Garry to actually put away MVP. Whereas I think if he chooses to grapple with him, if he chooses to take him down, we might see that the levels are just not the same when it hits the mat.
100%. Very fair point. I'm very curious. I think there is 2 routes to victory here for Ian Garry. You know, I do agree with you in what you're saying. I want to see that as well. I want to see that grappling approach. I thought we were going to see it against Jeff Neal. I was wrong. And I'm not going to be fooled. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I think we're going to see a striking battle here with MVP. And look, if it is, that's going to be a very tight, technical, interesting fight, to tell you the truth. It's not easy to go out there and do it. I think MVP is very underrated here. I think the way Ian Garry has been speaking about MVP puts more pressure on him to go out there and put on a hell of a performance. If he's saying that, you know, he's not good enough or not a legend and everything like that, well, you know, you've got to go out there and prove that yourself. And yeah, it's going to be super interesting. It always is. Very curious to see how that fight goes down. Looking at the undercard real quick, we'll blast through some of these fights. Joe Pyfer versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Obviously, Pyfer coming back off of his latest loss in the UFC. Or I think it might be his first loss in the UFC, I should say, against Jack Hermanson. Another difficult test here against Marc-Andre Barriault. He's a tough guy. He kind of is a bruiser, similar enough to the way Joe Pyfer is a bruiser as well. And now, you know, Joe Pyfer is coming in maybe not as confident as he would have been after coming in, you know, and picking up the loss against Jack Hermanson. It's going to be a very interesting fight, and it's going to, like, we're going to see what Joe Pyfer is really made of going in there, because you pick up a win against Marc-Andre Barriault, it's not going to be an easy win one way or another.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think this is slightly more in Joe Pyfer's wheelhouse. Like, Hermanson always has the takedown option. He always has an ability to mix it up. He's obviously very gritty, obviously very grindy. He knows his way around an octagon. That was the veteran test, and that veteran test didn't go super, super, super well for Joe Pyfer, at least not as well as the UFC would have wanted it to go. And so the level is dropped down just a touch, where Barriault is going to be happy to throw hands, happy to do big punching things, and Joe Pyfer is going to be the same. And my question coming in here, as you've already alluded to, is, are we going to get a case of the Sergey Pavlovich's versus Alexander Volkov's, where there's a touch of hesitancy because he's taken a loss and he took some damage and et cetera, or are we going to see that Pyfer has been able to get over that adequately enough that he can go in and fight to the best of his abilities? I don't know. We're going to find out.
We absolutely are going to find out. Very interested. That's a good fight. I'm looking forward to seeing those two boys going at it. A couple of belters on the undercard, really. Cub Swanson versus Andre Feely as well. Harry, at 145 pounds. A fight that almost is guaranteed to deliver, really, the way the two of these guys fight.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, This felt to me like a fight that we must have seen before. Obviously we haven't, but like it's one of those fights where those guys have been around for so long. It's almost insane that we haven't seen it before. But I'm a big fan of both guys. Really like Andre Fili style when he's on, and obviously really like Cub Swanson style when he's on too. I am slightly leaning Andre Fili in this one. And I don't really have a good reason for that. I just think that the range and the length is going to be tough for Cub to try and meet her. But again, like Andre Fili reminds me of Cowboy Cerrone in that when he's on, he's grand, and when he's not on, he's terrible. And so, yeah, there's
and that kind of leans me towards Cub Swanson, who always kind of portrays that level of consistency here. And coming off a great win over Hakeem Dawodu as well. I mean, it was no easy feat as well. A lot of people were expecting Hakeem to go in there and win that fight. But, look, at time is not on Cub's side. I mean, Andre has been on a pretty good run of form lately as well. It'll be, I think, if Fili isn't on the top of his game, I think this could be a very difficult fight. Obviously coming off the back of a loss to Dan Ige is no shame in that either. So, yeah, I think this is fight of the night potential, to tell you the truth. I think these guys are just going, I mean, I was live in attendance for Cub Swanson versus Doo Ho Choi, UFC 206 in Toronto. Cub Swanson chose to leave a piece of himself inside that octagon last night, as did Doo Ho Choi. Big fight card here. Cub Swanson always lives up for it. Andre Fili loves a fight. I think this one could really deliver on the night. I'm really excited to see them fight. Jean Silva versus Charles Jourdain as well at 145. The fight underneath that, Harry, is another absolute cracking fight as well, and one that I would expect to deliver.
Definitely. Both bangers. Charles Jourdain, again, super long, hits hard. I'm never going to turn down a Charles Jourdain fight, and so sign me up is what they say.
Sign me up, as the lad says. 135. We have probably one of the most exciting prospects in the UFC right now, in Peyton Talbot, who's going in there to take on Yanis Gamori. Gamori obviously has had a little bit of a history. Was supposed to fight Caelan Loughran on his UFC debut, wasn't going to make weight, had that fight moved to 145, lost to William Gomis. Coming in here now against Peyton Talbot, I think the UFC have sent a message really with this one. They're feeding Peyton Talbot this guy. They probably are not enjoying the fact that Gamori is messing around a little bit with his weight and stuff. Big question, will Gamori be able to make weight? This is going to be a fight, I think, that we're going to see a showcase of Peyton Talbot's skill set again. And I'm excited to see it happen too, to be honest. He's a very exciting prospect, isn't he, Harry?
He is, yeah, I agree. I mean, he seems as though he's like a budding star, hanging around with Tony Hawk and chilling and doing all this stuff and building the brand very naturally, which is always something that, that we love to see. I think for Gamori obviously hits hard in the pocket, but Peyton Talbot's just a bit of a wild man, can do a little bit of everything, and clearly the UFC are high on him, and we should be high on him as well. So I did have a big question as to whether Gamori is going to make weight. I'm glad that you've already referenced that, but
yeah,
the debacle with Caelan Loughran is not something that we should just forget happened, right?
The debacle with Caelan Loughran I would argue would have seen a fighter just get cut completely back in old school UFC days, to tell you the truth. I think the UFC normally don't mess around with stuff like that. It's interesting, but I think, they've kind of signed his own death warrant with matching him up at a fight like this. Even with William Gomis, a tough fight as well. Like, he's not getting easy fights. He's not being put in there with easy fighters too. And this is going to be, it's going to be a long night in the office if Gamori does manage to make weight, I feel, isn't it?
Yeah, very possible.
Michelle Waterson Gomez versus Gillian Robertson at 115. That fight is guaranteed to go the distance. That's where I'll stamp my decision sticker on that. We've got Andrei Arlovsky versus Martin Budaj at 265 pounds. Fair play to Arlovsky, still in there, still making money, fighting on one of the biggest cards of the year. We've got Carlos Hernandez versus Rai Tsutsura. Tsutsura coming in at 9-0 off of the road to the UFC, has been racking up a couple of impressive wins there. UFC seems to be investing in the Japanese market now. We're seeing obviously the signings of Kaya Sakura, Tetsura Tiara coming in here, and now we have Rei Tetsura as well. Long live Japanese mixed martial arts. The origins of mixed martial arts must we forget. Ricky Simon versus Vincius Oliveira is the opening fight of the night. Of the last 4 or 5 fights that I mentioned, Harry, any quick thoughts, any opinions on how those fights are going to go down if you're looking forward to seeing anybody in action?
So I'm not actually sure that Waterson Gomez and Gillian Robertson does go the distance. I think if Waterson gets taken down, Gillian Robertson on top is obviously a destroyer. If not, I can see Waterson Gomez stopping Gillian Robertson on the feet.
On the feet, yeah. I think we're going to find a little bit of a mix of the both of that, where we're going to spend a lot of the fight with Gillian Robertson trying to take Waterson down, not being able to, maybe getting her down, maybe landing a little bit, but I feel the majority of the fight will play out on the feet. I think Waterson Gomez doesn't have that killer power within her. It's going to have to be kind of an accumulation of damage with Gillian Robertson, which could happen. But I'm still leaning on this one going to all the way, going to the judges' scorecards, that being said.
Yeah, I can't argue too harshly. I just, it wouldn't surprise me if one of them, because both of them are horrendous where the other is good, it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if one finished the other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I definitely see it. Like, I mean, Michelle Waterson Gomez coming in here 4 losses in a row. You know, she needs a win big time, so that's going to get her highly motivated. Obviously, Gillian Robinson coming off of a win over Polyana Viana, which is a good win in my opinion. Obviously, I lost to Tabitha Ritchie before that, but you know, I think Gillian Robinson's strength is getting the fight down, is on top, and how quickly she can get the finish when it's down there. It'd be interesting to see what happens in that one. Any other thoughts? Simon, Arlovsky, Ricky Simon?
Always happy to see Ricky Simon in a fight. I don't understand why Andrei Arlovsky still wants to fight, but fair play to him. I'll watch it when he's there.
He's on a big fat ass fucking contract. That's why fair play to him.
Yeah, fair play to him indeed. I mean, Martin Budai is useless, so hopefully Arlovsky could drag this one out.
That's definitely going to decision too, I would say. That's Arlovsky is becoming decision merchant. It'll be a long start to the night here.
Yeah, it probably will be a long start for the night, to be fair to you. But other than that, I mean, we're looking at a very top-heavy card, and that's fine, right? Like, that's no problem. The UFC are trying to sell pay-per-views at the end of the day. For me personally, I think my favorite fight on the card is Ian Garry and MVP, just because I'm so fascinated to see, one, if Ian Garry chooses to strike with MVP, what is he going to do? Like, how is he going to adopt a strategy for that? That's really, really interesting to me. And then not only what's he going to do, but does it work, right? Is he able to win a striking battle with MVP? If he is, like, maybe we should reconsider what we thought our level of striking is for somebody like Ian Garry. And then if he doesn't, and he does go out and take him down, and he does submit him, or he does beat him up on the ground, like, I think we then have to add some more props for the fight IQ of Ian Garry. Then again, I could absolutely see MVP going out and just decimating Ian Garry in the way that MVP does. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's a wicked fight.
Absolutely wicked fight, and that's a wicked way to end the Severe setup this week. As I said, we'll be back for the balance breakdown. We'll break down this card and these fights from top to tail at BJJ_Harry Powell, at O'Neill MMA. We'll talk to you next week. Enjoy the fights this weekend.